The summer of 1847 descended upon Louisiana like a fever, thick and suffocating, a relentless embrace from which there was no escape. The very air hung a pall, thick with the cloying perfume of magnolia and the insidious breath of decay, a sweetness that veiled the creeping putrefaction beneath. Within the parish of St. Helena, where cotton fields unfurled themselves endlessly towards horizons bereft of freedom, the Beaumont estate towered, a monolithic testament to power incarnate. Governor Charles Beaumont held dominion over all that the eye might survey. 20,000 acres, 300 souls in the chains of servitude, and a wife whose radiant beauty was the whispered currency of parlors from Baton Rouge to New Orleans. Helena Beaumont presented a vision exquisitely wrought in silk and pearls, her blonde tresses ever flawlessly coiffed, her posture an impeccable study in aristocratic grace. At 32, she had perfected the delicate art of eliciting admiration without true recognition, inspiring affection without physical embrace, and provoking envy without ever being truly comprehended. Yet beneath the intricate confines of corsets and the veneer of practiced courtesy, beneath the societal smiles and dutiful Sunday prayers, Helena Beaumont found herself suffocating. The very mansion stood as a cathedral of southern excess, its white columns aspiring heavenward, its marble floors imported from distant Italy, its chandeliers capturing the light like cascades of frozen water. 12 bedrooms graced its expanse, yet only one knew the presence of husband and wife. Separate wings, separate lives, indeed separate worlds existing beneath a single shared roof. Charles Beaumont, at 57, bore a countenance sculpted by the relentless chisels of ambition and hardened by the inexorable forge of power. His political ascent had been erected upon the foundations of cotton, strategic compromise, and the calculated subjugation of those he deemed lesser. He espoused doctrines of civilization and progress, even as his vast wealth was steeped in the very blood of those who toiled in his fields beneath the unforgiving Louisiana sun. He loved his wife not as a companion, but as he loved his plantation, a possession, a gleaming reflection, irrefutable proof of his dominion over the world. Helena understood her ordained position within this intricate arrangement. She had understood it since the day her father bartered her future for political ascendancy when she was but 17. Marriage, for her, was not the bloom of romance, but a cold transaction, not a sacred partnership, but a tireless performance. She executed her role with flawless precision, the gracious hostess, the devoted wife, the very emblem of refinement that every governor required upon his arm, until the fateful day her gaze fell upon Elijah. It transpired within the stables one morning in late May, when the summer's heat had not yet fully ripened into an unbearable burden, and the world still feigned a fleeting gentleness. Helena had ventured forth to inspect the new mare Charles had acquired, another acquisition, another ostentatious declaration of his wealth. She seldom ventured into the utilitarian sectors of the estate. Her existence was meticulously circumscribed by gardens, parlors, and the stifling decorum of afternoon teas. But upon that morning, compelled by a nameless restlessness, she traversed past the rose garden, past the humble quarters where the house servants resided, and onward towards the stables where the field laborers occasionally gathered for repairs and provisions. He was in the act of shoeing a horse when her presence graced the threshold. Elijah was 30 years of age, though the ledger books coldly designated him property item number 47, acquired in the year 1839 for $800. He stood 6 feet in height, his physique honed by ceaseless labor that would have shattered men of lesser constitution, his skin the rich, deep hue of Louisiana earth after a generous rain. Yet it was his eyes that halted Helena in her very stride, eyes that refused to be cast down, that would not yield, that scorned the performance of degradation which servitude ruthlessly demanded. He met her gaze for 3 seconds, a span of time that stretched and warped into an eternity. Then, with an almost imperceptible shift, he returned to his demanding labor. Helena felt a fissure appear within her breast, a rupture of something she had sequestered so profoundly that its very existence had slipped from her memory. She remained transfixed, observing the deliberate precision and tender care with which his hands executed their task. The rivulets of sweat tracing paths down his forearms, the gentle murmur of his voice as he spoke to the horse, a voice devoid of fear, bereft of anger, possessing only a quiet, indomitable strength that seemed an anomaly in a world crafted for its annihilation. "You," she uttered, her voice a mere whisper. "What is your name?" He did not raise his gaze. "Elijah, ma'am." "Elijah," she echoed, and the name resonated within her like both a sacred prayer and a damning blasphemy, entwined as one. She departed without a further utterance, her heart tumultuous against her ribs, her hands tremulous within their delicate lace gloves. That night, sustenance offered no solace, nor sleep any repose. She lay beside her husband's slumbering, resonant form, her gaze fixed upon the ceiling, perceiving naught but those eyes. Eyes that scorned possession, rejected nullity, defied effacement. It ought to have concluded there. In any world governed by reason, in any narrative prioritizing logic and security, Elelonina Beaumont would have reverted to her needlepoint and her social engagements, and Elijah would have remained precisely what the law proclaimed him, an object, not a being, assuredly not a man whose existence held any intrinsic worth. But the heart, alas, acknowledges no law, and certain hungers, once roused, cannot be quelled by starvation back into acquiescent silence. Their second colloquy transpired in the rose garden 3 days hence. Elelonina had cultivated the habit of solitary walks there in the nascent hours, before the mansion roused itself, before the elaborate performance of her life commenced. She rationalized her presence, telling herself she craved air, solitude, anything to belie the truth that relentlessly clawed its way toward the surface of her awareness. Elijah was meticulously pruning the roses. His presence there occasioned no surprise. The enslaved souls of the Beaumont estate were simultaneously ubiquitous and ephemeral, visible only when necessity dictated, invisible when their presence proved inconvenient. Yet Elelonina knew, with the infallible intuition born of intertwined guilt and desire, that he had been assigned to this particular task with deliberate intent, that some force, be it the overseer's machinations or fate itself, had orchestrated their proximity once more. "They are exquisite," she observed, with a graceful gesture towards the blooms. "Yes, ma'am." His voice was guarded, perfectly neutral, meticulously devoid of any inflection that could be twisted against him. "Do you possess a family, Elijah?" The query lingered in the humid air, heavy and palpable, like a harbinger of danger. Enslaved souls were not meant to claim families, not in a manner that bore true significance, not in a way sanctioned by law or shielded by sentiment. They possessed connections, ephemeral ties that could be brutally sundered at auction, bonds that held meaning only until they proved inconvenient to the master's ledger of profit. "I once had a wife," he stated softly, his hands never ceasing their diligent work. "She was sold away 7 years ago, to Alabama, I heard. A daughter, too. I never learned her fate." Elelonina's throat constricted. Such narratives were not unknown to her. Indeed, they formed the ubiquitous hum of Southern life, the permissible tragedies that permitted those like her to slumber upon silk sheets, while others endured the brutal embrace of chains. But to her core, "I am profoundly sorry," her core. "I am profoundly sorry," she murmured. He then fixed his gaze upon her, truly beholding her, and she perceived a fleeting flicker across his countenance. Not hope, for that would have been the gravest folly. Not trust, for that remained an utter impossibility, but rather, perhaps, a nascent recognition, the acknowledgement that she had addressed him as if he were a fellow human, as if his profound loss held significance, as if his suffering were not merely the immutable order of the world. "Sorrow changes nothing, ma'am," he stated. "Yet I thank you for the sentiment nonetheless." She yearned to articulate more. She longed to rage against the stark injustice, to pledge assurances she possessed no power to fulfill, to somehow bridge the vast chasm of cruelty that sundered them. But the words withered in her throat. For what utterance could she possibly make that would not be rendered obscene by its sheer inadequacy? Instead, she embarked upon a path far more perilous. She returned the following morn and the morn thereafter. Initially, their exchanges were sparse. Elelonina would stroll amongst the roses while Elijah meticulously tended them, the silence between them gravid with unspoken truths. Yet gradually, cautiously, words began to surface. Small, hesitant exchanges that were both utterly meaningless and profoundly significant. She inquired about the roses, and he instructed her in their nomenclature, their specific needs, the profound patience demanded to coax beauty to bloom in such unyielding soil. He spoke of the rhythms of seasons and the art of pruning, of discerning precisely when to cut back and when to allow growth. And in his words, she discerned a potent metaphor for survival that caused a visceral ache within her breast. She recounted tales of books she had devoured, of a world beyond Louisiana's oppressive confines that she would forever be denied, of the suffocating void of a life lived solely for outward appearances. She did not voice the gnawing loneliness within her. Such an admission would have been too stark, too disarmingly honest. Yet he discerned it nonetheless in the pregnant pauses between her utterances, in the subtle softening of her voice when she momentarily shed the burden of performance. The house servants were the first to perceive it. They always were. Enslaved souls gleaned survival through acute observation, through their unerring ability to decipher the subtleties that white people presumed invisible. They witnessed Elelena Beaumont stirring before dawn, observed her increasingly frequent pilgrimages to the rose garden, noted the lingering quality of her presence when Elijah was near, and her swift departure in his absence. Mama Seraphine, the cook who had served the Beaumont lineage for 34 years, observed with eyes that had witnessed too many tribulations to harbor any remaining capacity for surprise. She uttered no word, yet she commenced leaving biscuits, carefully wrapped in cloth, near the garden gate. A small kindness, a silent admonition, a fervent prayer against the tempest she knew was gathering. For all were keenly aware of the dire consequences when white women regarded black men with aught save indifference or disdain. All understood the grim chronicles of accusations and lynchings, of cadavers discovered swaying from trees, of communities utterly sundered because one had smiled too warmly or stood too near. But Elelena and Elijah were not smiling. They were instead drowning, separately and yet together, in an emotional current neither was permitted to feel. By the close of June, their conversations had deepened, turning towards matters of profound significance. She spoke to him of her marriage, not as a lament, for that would have been unseemly, but in the timbre of careful confession, the pervasive loneliness, the acute sensation of existing as a mere decoration rather than a sentient being, the gradual, insidious suffocation of a life prescribed by others. He recounted his memories of freedom, not as a tangible place, but as an elusive sensation from his childhood, before his initial sale into bondage at the tender age of 8. The echo of his mother's voice, the taste of sustenance he had cultivated with his own hands, the brief luminous moments when he had been truly his own, these he spoke of. They never touched, not even once. They preserved the physical chasm that law and custom inexorably demanded, yet in every other conceivable manner they stretched towards each other across an abyss declared impassable. Meanwhile, within the grand mansion, Governor Charles Beaumont began to observe a resurgence of smiles upon his wife's countenance. He knew not the reason, and this uncertainty bred a growing disquiet within him. A man of his elevated station comprehended power, control, the meticulous preservation of order. A contented wife was certainly desirable, but a wife harboring secrets was a perilous entity. He commenced his silent vigilance, and within the slave quarters, prayers began to ascend. July descended with a ferocity that seemed almost biblical in its scale. The sun pressed upon Louisiana like a divine pronouncement, transforming the very air into a tangible, shimmering substance that required arduous effort to traverse. The cotton fields undulated with shimmering heat waves, and the enslaved laborers moved through them like spectral figures, their bodies reduced to mechanical automatons by exhaustion, their minds having sought refuge in whatever interior sanctuary still belonged solely to them. Within the Beaumont mansion's grand confines, Elelena perceived the heat differently, as a fever, a nascent madness, a corporeal manifestation of the tumultuous stirrings within her breast. She had ceased her self-deception, at least within the sanctuary of her own mind, that her early morning perambulations were for the sake of roses or crisp air or any of the decorous pretexts a woman of her standing might employ to quit her bed before dawn. She went to behold him. That, stripped bare, was the unvarnished truth, stark, dreadful, immutable. Elijah had been reassigned to labors nearer the main house. The overseer, a man named Thaddeus Cole, whose cruelty had achieved legendary renown even amidst an institution fundamentally constructed upon such brutality, had effected the change without offering a single explanation. Some of the other enslaved souls whispered that Cole harbored suspicions, that he was strategically positioning Elijah where his movements might be subjected to more rigorous scrutiny. Others dismissed it as mere coincidence, the arbitrary reshuffling of human chattel that occurred with relentless regularity upon the plantations. But Mama Seraphine possessed a deeper insight. She had observed the Governor Beaumont's gaze begin to track his wife's peregrinations, had overheard his seemingly innocuous inquiries concerning Elelenena's habits, her routines, her uncharacteristic buoyancy of spirit. The governor was no imbecile. He was a predator, patient and calculating, and he had caught the faint, disquieting scent of transgression. "Child," Seraphine addressed Elelenena one morn, intercepting her in the hallway ere she could slip unseen outdoors. "You tamper with a fire that promises to consume more than merely yourself." Elelenena paused, her hand resting upon the doorframe. "I apprehend not your meaning." "Indeed, you do." The elder woman's voice, though not unkind, bore the gravitas of one who had witnessed this narrative unfold countless times before, who foresaw its inevitable, tragic denouement. "I have witnessed the cast of your countenance upon your return from your morning perambulations. I have observed the gaze of that man when you pass by, and I tell you now, nothing auspicious shall emerge from this endeavor. We have committed no wrong," Elelenena declared, and in her own voice, she discerned a tremor of desperation. "It matters not what you have done or left undone. What truly matters is its appearance. What matters is what the governor will surmise when he discovers the truth. And discover it he shall, Miss Elelenena. He invariably does." Elelenena met the ancient woman's gaze and beheld an authentic terror residing there, not for Elelenena's fragile reputation or her marriage of convenience, but for Elijah's very life. Such was the grim calculus of transgression in this world. For her, it might portend scandal, divorce, social ostracization. For him, it presaged the noose and the pyre. A death so monstrous in its brutality that it would serve as a chilling admonition for generations to come. "I shall exercise caution," Elelenena murmured. "Caution is insufficient," Seraphine rejoined. "You must desist now, ere it is irrevocably too late." But the irrevocable moment had already passed, and both women, with shared foresight, recognized this truth. That afternoon, Elelenena discovered Elijah within the workshed situated behind the stables, diligently mending a fractured wagon wheel. The space was dim and confined, redolent with the scent of wood shavings and oil, and for the first time since the genesis of their encounters, they found themselves truly unobserved. No garden paths offered passage to prying servants. No open vistas allowed observation from the main house. "You ought not be here," Elijah uttered, his gaze still downcast, his hand steadfast upon the spoke he was painstakingly fitting into place. "I know they are watching now. Cole has been making inquiries concerning my whereabouts, my activities, the persons with whom I converse." "I know," Elelenena reiterated, and this time her voice fractured perceptibly. Elijah laid aside his tools and at last raised his gaze to meet hers. In the shadowed interior of the workshed, his face remained half obscured, yet his eyes ensnared what meager light filtered through the fissures in the walls. "Then why are you here?" She found herself without an answer. How could she articulate that for 15 years of her marriage she had felt akin to a porcelain doll encased within a glass cabinet, beautiful, brittle, utterly devoid of life, until a mere 3 months prior, when a man, whom the world denied the very appellation of man, had gazed upon her as if she possessed true substance? How could she convey that, for the nascent time in her adult existence, she felt truly seen, heard, comprehended, not as a mere ornament or a prescribed duty, but as an individual possessed of thoughts, desires, and a soul slowly famishing? "Because I cannot remain absent," she confessed at last, and the unvarnished honesty of her declaration hovered between them, a tangible presence, simultaneously sacred and profane. Elijah remained silent for a protracted moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and deliberately measured. "Do you comprehend what fate awaits men such as I, who are even accused of casting an improper gaze upon women such as yourself? It matters not whether it is true or not. It matters not if she is the one who sought him out. They tie him to a tree and they—" He ceased, his jaw tightening. "Do you comprehend my meaning?" "Yes." "Then you understand I cannot harbor this desire. I cannot permit myself to yearn for this. Such desires are not for individuals such as I. They are merely a swifter path to perdition." Elelonena took a single step closer, then another. She was tremulous, whether from fear or desire, or the tumultuous collision of both, she could not discern. "What if my desire suffices for us both?" "That is not the manner in which the world operates, Miss Elelonena. My name is Elelonena, simply Elelonena. When we are alone, I implore you, do not address me with any title. Allow me to be merely a woman. Just this once, just here." Something imperceptibly shifted in his expression. A hairline fissure then appeared in the impenetrable armor of survival that enslaved souls wore like a second skin. "You ask me to relinquish all that preserves my very existence, all that I have gleaned since I was old enough to comprehend that my life is not, nor ever will be, truly my own. I am asking you to remember your inherent humanity, that I am human, that this—" She gestured between them with a trembling hand. "This feeling, whatever its essence, is real. It possesses weight, even if the world loudly proclaims its non-existence, even if the world insists that we ourselves do not." Elijah regarded her for a protracted interval, and she perceived the silent war unfolding across his countenance, a brutal conflict between the instinct for self-preservation and the desperate human yearning to be seen, to be valued, to hold significance for another soul in a world that had spent his entire existence affirming his nullity. Finally he spoke. "My daughter's name was Grace. I contemplate her every day. I wonder if she remembers me. I wonder if she lives. I wonder if she is growing up believing her father merely abandoned her, did not fight for her, did not love her enough to—" His voice fractured. "I could not save her, could not save my wife, could not save myself. I awaken each morning shackled by chains I cannot see, yet feel in every breath I draw. And you stand here imploring me to feel, to desire, to be something other than what they forged me into. Do you comprehend the depth of that agony?" Elelonena felt tears coursing down her face. "I am sorry, merciful God. I am so sorry. I should never have— I did not bid you cease." His words descended between them like a burning match upon dry kindling. "I did not say I do not feel it," Elijah continued, his voice hoarse with the raw emotion he had spent a lifetime rigorously suppressing. "I did not say I do not behold you every time I close my eyes, that I do not hear your voice when I strive for sleep, that I do not awaken contemplating the singular manner in which you truly listen when I speak, as if my words possess intrinsic value. I merely said, it caused pain. But perhaps—" He paused, a desperate and reckless flicker illuminating his countenance. "Perhaps some things are worth the agony." Elelonena bridged the chasm between them, her hands instinctively reaching for his ere she could restrain herself. His hands were coarse with the deeply etched calluses of relentless labor, of enduring violence, of a lifetime spent as a mere implement. Hers were soft, exquisitely pampered, adorned with rings whose worth surpassed the very value of a human life within the brutal economy that had forged them both. When their fingers intertwined, it felt like both revolution and damnation, fused into a single cataclysmic moment. They remained thus for minutes that stretched into hours, unspoken words suspended, breaths held captive, merely clinging to each other across a divide declared absolute. Elelonena felt his pulse throb through his palm, perceived the tremor in his hands mirroring the quivering in her own. "This is sheer madness," she murmured. "Yes, they will surely slay you if they uncover this. Yes, I cannot shield you. I possess no power. I am merely—" "You are not merely anything," Elijah interjected, his voice imbued with a fierce conviction that compelled her gaze to rise and meet his eyes. "You are a person who beholds me as a person in this entire oppressive world. That is more rare than gold. That is sometimes more precious than freedom itself. To be seen, truly seen. Do you comprehend how long it has been since I experienced such a revelation?" "Then see me too," Elelonena implored. "Please truly see me, not the governor's wife, not the decorous lady, not the construct I am compelled to be for all others. Simply me, the person I was before they dictated who I must become." "I see you, Elelonena," he affirmed, and to hear her name uttered by his lips, her name alone, devoid of title or chasm of distance, felt akin to a baptism into something nascent and terrifying. "I have been seeing you since that inaugural day in the stables, discerning the loneliness you bear as I bear my own, perceiving the confines of your cage, though yours possesses silken bars instead of iron, witnessing the profound hunger within you for something authentic, something that transcends mere performance or obligation, or a life lived solely for the expectations of others." "What exactly are we doing?" Elelonena questioned, uncertain whether her query pertained to the immediate moment or to the grander trajectory of the forces they had unleashed. "I do not know," Elijah conceded. "Yet I know this: I am weary of mere survival without true living, weary of being utterly dead within, simply to persist alive without. If this is the sole occasion I am permitted to feel human, to feel desired, to feel that my existence holds significance for someone, even if it endures but for a single minute, even if it exacts from me my very all, perhaps that, then, is worth the price." They remained clasped hand in hand when the ominous sound of approaching footsteps echoed near the workshed. They sprang apart instantly, muscle, memory, and terror conspiring to move faster than conscious thought. Elijah seized his tools. Elelonena smoothed her gown, and by the moment Thaddeus Cole materialized in the doorway, they stood 6 feet apart, a perfectly decorous distance between mistress and slave. There was naught to witness save a woman who had ostensibly strayed into the improper edifice, and a man wholly absorbed in his arduous toil. But Cole was no imbecile. His eyes traversed between them with the calculating scrutiny of a man whose livelihood was predicated upon deciphering guilt and apprehension. He was 43. Lean and grizzled, with a countenance that appeared to have been hewn from a substance more obdurate than mere flesh. He bore a whip, coiled at his belt, serving less as an implement than as an potent emblem. All understood his fearsome capabilities, and most days, the implicit threat sufficed. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Beaumont," he uttered, his voice imbued with a spurious politeness that, paradoxically, rendered his words all the more menacing. "May I assist you in locating aught?" "I was seeking the stable master," Elelonena replied, her voice remarkably steady despite the tumultuous pounding within her breast. "My mare has been favoring her left foreleg. The stable master is in the south barn, ma'am. This, here, is merely the workshed, naught of interest to a lady." "Of course, my apologies." Elelonena moved towards the doorway, compelling herself to a measured pace, striving to uphold the dignity her station demanded. As she passed Cole, she felt his gaze upon her, palpable as a physical touch, assessing, calculating, meticulously storing information for some grim future purpose. She did not cast a backward glance at Elijah. Yet that night, lying in the confines of her bed while her husband's resonant snores filled his separate chamber, Elelonena fixed her gaze upon the ceiling, perceiving the lingering phantom of Elijah's hand intertwined with her own. She comprehended now the enormity of her actions, of their shared transgression. They had traversed a threshold that could never again be recrossed. They had awakened a sensation that rendered them both vulnerable in ways that portended mutual ruin, and she knew, with the chilling clarity that attends one standing on the precipice of an abyss, that she could not, would not, halt her course, that whatever this was, be it love or madness or the desperate rebellion of two ensnared souls, it had become more indispensable than safety, more vital even than mere survival. In the slave quarters, Elijah reposed upon his meager pallet, his palm tracing the phantom impression of her hand, striving to engrave the sensation into memory ere the world wrested it away. He knew the impending doom. He had always known. Men such as he were not destined for felicitous conclusions. Their lot was the noose and the pyre, their names invoked as chilling cautionary tales. But for one fleeting moment within that workshed, he had been vibrantly, fully alive. He had been seen, he had held significance. And if that was all he was ever granted, he mused, perhaps it was enough to die for. Mama Seraphine, unable to court slumber, sat by her window, her gaze fixed upon the main house. She had witnessed this tableau before, generations past, in the verdant spring of her youth. A white woman and a black man, momentarily oblivious to the cruel exigencies the world exacted from them. It had concluded in a deluge of blood then. It would, inevitably, conclude in blood now. She commenced to pray, though she herself was unsure for what benediction she supplicated, for their salvation or their swift cessation, for mercy or for justice, for forgiveness, or for the sheer fortitude to endure the impending tide. For something was indeed approaching. She could sense it in the very air, thick and oppressive as the August heat that was rolling towards Louisiana like an inexorable army of fire. The tempest was gathering its might, and when it finally broke, it threatened to consume them all. August transformed the Beaumont estate into a veritable furnace. The heat proved so oppressive that even the privileged retreated into a languid lethargy, moving sluggishly through their days, fanning themselves with costly imported luxuries, whilst the enslaved toiled in fields that shimmered like cruel mirages. The cotton, ripe for harvest, portended 18-hour days beneath a sun that seemed intent on scorching the world into a state of stark purity. Elijah toiled until his hands bled, until his back cried out in agony, until exhaustion itself became a perverse mercy, momentarily stilling the thoughts of the impossible feelings he harbored. Yet even the profound depths of exhaustion could not expunge Elelonena from his thoughts. She was an omnipresent phantom in every moment. In the dappled fall of light through the trees, in the whisper of wind through the magnolias, in the gnawing ache within his breast that bore no relation to physical exertion, Elelonena, for her part, had transformed into a stranger to herself. The decorous governor's wife, who had hitherto navigated life with the mechanical precision of a wind-up doll, had been supplanted by a woman who subsisted solely for fleeting, illicit moments. For the brief, clandestine encounters in the garden before dawn, for the fleeting seconds when she might glimpse Elijah from a window and know, with a certainty that transcended sight, that he was alive, was real, was still present in the world. They could converse no longer, not after Cole's ominous interjection within the workshed. The overseer had commenced observing them both with the unblinking, focused intensity of a hunter who had irrevocably marked his quarry. He materialized wherever Elelonena trod, his presence a relentless admonition of pervasive surveillance and latent threat. He assigned Elijah to the most distant fields, the most arduous labor, the stations where he would be simultaneously most exposed and most stringently controlled. It was a refined form of torment to be held in such proximity, yet remain impossibly sundered, to behold each other across distances that might as well have been fathomless oceans. Elelonena felt it as a corporeal anguish, a ceaseless ache within her breast that no measure of laudanum or supplication could assuage. Thus she embarked upon a course of profound recklessness. She began to compose letters. They commenced as a means to alleviate the mounting pressure within her. A deluge of thoughts and emotions she possessed no other soul with whom to share. Confessions she dared not utter aloud. She wrote deep into the night, ensconced in her private sitting room by the flickering gleam of candlelight, her hand traversing the paper in loops and curves that felt akin to fervent prayers or ancient spells or the clandestine mapping of forbidden territory. She chronicled her childhood, depicting the girl she had been ere her father bartered her future for political ascendancy. She penned passages about her marriage, about the gradual, insidious demise of a life lived bereft of intimacy or comprehension. She recorded the momentous occasion of encountering Elijah, detailing the manner in which something dormant within her had roused itself, the terror and the exhilaration of feeling vibrantly, fully alive for the nascent time. Initially, she harbored no intention of dispatching them, but after 2 weeks of desolate silence, of beholding him only from a haunting distance, of the crushing solitude born from having touched something profoundly real, only to have it brutally sundered away, she could no longer endure it. She divined a means. There was a girl named Dinina, 16 years of age, who labored within the main house as a chambermaid. She was diminutive and demure, possessing the acute cleverness that enslaved souls were compelled to cultivate for their very survival. Attentive without appearing to be so, present without drawing notice, astute enough to comprehend the perils inherent in the secrets of white folk. Elelonena approached her one evening when the remainder of the household was gathered for dinner. "Dinina," she murmured quietly, "I require your assistance with a matter." The girl's eyes widened, suffused with palpable fear. The entreaties of white folk for assistance often portended peril, either for the one supplicated or for a loved one they cherished. "Yes, ma'am," Dinina responded with guarded caution. Elelonena extended to her a folded piece of paper meticulously sealed with wax. "I require you to convey this to Elijah, the man who toils in the fields. Do you comprehend of whom I speak?" Danina's expression transformed, drawing perilously close to outright terror. "Ma'am, please." Alelenena's voice fractured with desperation. "I am aware of the gravity of my request. I comprehend the danger, but I possess no other recourse. And I—" She paused, endeavoring to distill words that would impart urgency without betraying too great a revelation. "I need him to apprehend something of vital import. Mrs. Beaumont, if they apprehend me—" "They will not," Elelenena interjected. "You are invisible to them. They never truly perceive any of you." The words escaped Elelenena's lips ere she could arrest their flight, and she recoiled at the stark ugliness of the truth they unveiled. "I am sorry. That was not— I merely mean that you can traverse spaces I cannot. You can reach him where I am utterly barred. Please, Danina, I implore you." The girl regarded the letter as if it were a venomous serpent, a thing capable of striking, poisoning, and delivering death. Yet she also discerned something in Elelenena's countenance that perhaps served as a reminder that white women, too, could experience profound pain, even if their suffering manifested differently, signified distinct realities, and carried disparate consequences. "If I undertake this," Danina uttered slowly, "you must promise me something, anything. When this enterprise explodes, and explode it will, ma'am, it invariably does, you must recall that I was merely following orders, that I possessed no other choice, that I was gripped by fear, and that you were the master's wife, and I could not refuse." The words landed as a visceral blow of stark reality. Elelenena comprehended Danina's true implication. "When this inevitably culminates in ruin, I implore you to shield me. I need you to perjure yourself for my sake. I need you to remember that I wield no power here, that I am as ensnared as yourself, yet afforded far less safeguard." "I promise," Elelenena affirmed. "I will shield you, regardless of the coming storm." Danina accepted the letter and secreted it into her apron, her mind already devising stratagems to reach Elijah unobserved, calculating the myriad risks with the meticulous precision of a general orchestrating a military campaign. For such was the grim visage of survival for those devoid of rights, bereft of protection, afforded no margin for error. That night, during the fleeting interval betwixt dinner service and repose, when the enslaved laborers of the main house were granted a scant few minutes that almost mimicked their own, Danina stole away to the quarters where the field hands slumbered. She discovered Elijah seated outside his cabin, the heat too stifling for sleep within, his gaze fixed on nothingness with the vacant 1,000-yard stare of one who had spent the day enduring labor akin to a machine. "I have something for you," Danina whispered, pressing the letter into his palm. "From the grand house. From—" She did not utter Elelenena's name. Names possessed power. Names could serve as damning testimony. Elijah regarded the sealed paper in his hand as if it were simultaneously a priceless treasure and a ticking bomb. "Who else knows of this?" "Only I," she replied, "and I strive with all my might to erase the knowing from my mind." "A clever girl." "There exists no such thing as a clever slave," Danina retorted, with a bitter wisdom that transcended her tender years. "Only fortunate ones, and the departed, endeavor to remain fortunate." She vanished back towards the grand house, leaving Elijah in solitary communion with the letter and the profound knowledge that to break its seal would irrevocably alter all. He waited until the entire quarter was steeped in slumber. Then, by the faint, guarded glow of a carefully shielded candle, he fractured the wax seal and, for the first time, beheld Elelenena's script. "Elijah, I know not if this missive will find you. I know not if you will deign to read it should it arrive, but I am compelled to endeavor, for the silence has become unbearable, and I need you to apprehend truths I cannot voice aloud. I was a wraith before I encountered you. I concede this may sound melodramatic, yet it rings true. I moved through my existence like a specter, enacting a predetermined role, articulating lines penned by another, existing solely for the advantage of others. I had forgotten the very sensation of desire, of profound need, of any feeling beyond the cold strictures of obligation and fear. And then I beheld you, and something stirred within me that I had not even known had been slumbering. I know this is an utter impossibility. I know what the world pronounces concerning individuals such as us reaching for one another. I know the peril, merciful God, I know the peril. Every moment I dwell upon you is a moment wherein I imperil your very life. And that knowledge is a crushing burden I bear, like stones secreted in my pockets. Yet I cannot cease. I have earnestly attempted. I have supplicated for fortitude, for discipline, for the sagacity to relinquish this encroaching madness. Yet all I perceive is a deepening desperation, a greater hollowness, an intensified awareness that if I cannot behold you, cannot converse with you, cannot possess the knowledge of your existence, and that you sometimes contemplate me, then I shall revert to my former state of death, and that I cannot endure. You uttered in the workshed that certain things are worth the suffering. I dwell upon those words incessantly. I ponder the meaning of choosing agony over numbing insensibility, peril over sanctuary, raw feeling over mere survival, and I have come to realize that perhaps that is what being truly alive signifies. Not merely existing, not simply enduring, but choosing to feel even when that very feeling portends your destruction. I do not know what it is I implore of you. I do not possess the right to solicit anything. You owe me naught. I am a constituent part of the very system that has plundered everything from you, and no measure of feeling or longing can alter that fundamental injustice. But if there resides any part of you that resonates with what I feel, that perceives what I perceive when my gaze falls upon you, if there exists any possibility of something authentic between us, even if it can only subsist within letters, within shadows, within clandestine, fleeting moments, then I implore you, write back. Please, let me know I am not solitary in this encroaching madness. Please, let me know that I hold significance for you in the measure that you hold significance for me. Yours in ways I possess no right to be, Elelena. Elijah perused the letter thrice, his hands trembling, his throat constricted by emotions he possessed no secure means to articulate. She had distilled into words every sentiment he felt yet could never utter, had articulated the impossible connection burgeoning between them with a clarity both sublime and terrifying. To compose a reply was sheer insanity. It generated incriminating evidence. It rendered the imperceptible palpable. It provided their adversaries precisely the ammunition required to utterly demolish them both. He ought to incinerate the letter, ought to expunge it from his memory, ought to safeguard himself in the manner he had learned from the moment he comprehended his designation as property rather than person. But he did not incinerate it. Instead, he procured a stub of pencil and a scrap of paper, and in a hand that was both careful and cramped from years of secretly instructing himself in the forbidden arts of reading and writing, skills whose mere possession could result in his whipping, sale, or worse, he composed his reply. Elelena, you speak of being dead before you met me. I comprehend that truth more profoundly than you can imagine. I have been dead within since my 8th year, when I first apprehended that my life would never truly belong to me. Dead since they sold my wife. Dead since I clasped my daughter for the final time and knew I could not save her. Dead in all the ways that truly matter, save that my body still labors, still moves, still obeys its commands. Then you entered that stable and gazed upon me as if I were a man, not a mere chattel. And something I had believed lost forever began to respire once more. I am afraid, Elelena, more afraid than I ever have been, and I have known abundant fear. For hope is perilous for individuals such as I. Desire is perilous. Emotion is perilous. We are taught from childhood that the sole path to survival is to extinguish every spark within that renders us human, to become mere automatons that labor and obey, and never utter a grievance. But you are making me remember. I possess a heart, and hearts can shatter, and that shattering will inflict an agony far greater than anything Cole's whip ever inflicted upon me. I contemplate you incessantly, in the fields, when the sun's scorching intensity renders my vision blurred, in the night, when sleep eludes me, in the liminal spaces between moments, when I permit myself to forget my assigned status and simply embrace what I feel. And what I feel is a sensation for which I have no words, a sensation I possess no right to harbor, a sensation that might prove fatal to us both. But yes, you matter to me, more than anything has mattered in a span longer than I can recall, and if that renders me a fool, if that irrevocably seals my destiny, if that brings down all upon us, at least I was permitted to feel it. At least I was permitted to be truly alive. Genuinely alive, if only for a brief while. Write to me again, I beg you. Even if it is perilous, even if it is wrong, even if we both apprehend how this will likely conclude, allow me to remain alive a little longer. Elijah. The clandestine correspondence persisted through the crucible of August and into the fading days of September. Dinina became their unwitting courier, traversing the perilous boundary betwixt the worlds of house and field, bearing missives secreted within her apron, her sleeves, and once even concealed within the lining of a laundry basket. She performed this service partly from an absence of genuine choice, partly due to the small favors Elelonena bestowed upon her, but predominantly because she possessed an understanding that white folks seldom attained. Enslaved souls possess their own intricate lives, their own profound loves, their own desperate, grasping aspirations for happiness in a world meticulously designed to deny them aught resembling joy. She had witnessed Elijah and Elelonena together but once, that singular day in the workshed, but she had observed the profound way their gazes met, and it had evoked in her the memory of her own parents' silent communion before they were sundered and sold to disparate owners, before love became merely another precious commodity white folk could seize on a fleeting whim. Thus she bore the letters, even though the act filled her with profound terror, even though she knew it could result in her death, her sale, or a beating so brutal she would never recover. She carried them because, sometimes, one was compelled to undertake something perilous merely to recall one's inherent humanity. The letters lengthened, becoming more intimate, more profoundly honest. Elelonena chronicled her childhood, her mother's passing when she was but 12, and the suffocating strictures of Southern womanhood. Elijah recounted his existence before the advent of slavery, fragments of memory from a childhood that seemed to pertain to another soul entirely. They composed passages concerning the books Elelonena had perused, and Elijah yearned for the day he might read openly. They penned dreams they nurtured, futures they could never inhabit, worlds where they might simply exist as two souls who cherished one another, unimpeded by law or custom or the shadow of violence. They wrote of love, though they scrupulously avoided uttering the precise word itself. It was too perilous, too absolute, too akin to a damning confession that could be wielded against them in the merciless court of public opinion, which would inevitably sit in judgment of them both. Yet it was palpably present in every line, in every meticulously chosen word, in every missive that quietly affirmed, "I behold you, I know you, I cherish you. Your existence holds meaning." And then, in the waning days of September, a seismic shift occurred. Governor Charles Beaumont discovered the clandestine correspondence. He had not been specifically searching for them. Rather, he had been rummaging through Elelonena's private chambers for another object entirely, her jewelry box specifically, as he required a valuable necklace to present as a gift to the wife of a political ally. Elelonena was abroad, paying calls upon neighbors, and he had seized the opportune moment to invade her private rooms, an intrusion he seldom made. They maintained separate existences, separate domains, a marriage founded upon convenience and outward semblance rather than genuine intimacy. But when he drew open the drawer of her writing desk, intent on locating the key to the jewelry box, he discovered instead a folded sheet of paper. Intrigued, for Elelonena was habitually meticulous and misplaced papers were anathema to her character. He unfolded it and perused the first letter Elijah had penned in reply to his wife. For a protracted moment, Charles Beaumont stood utterly immobile, the incriminating letter clutched in his hand, his countenance betraying no emotion. He had meticulously constructed a political career upon the rigorous control of his expressions, upon never divulging his thoughts or sentiments until such a revelation served his calculated purposes. But within, behind the meticulously maintained mask, something cold and terrible began to unfurl its poisoned petals. He reread the letter. Then he systematically ransacked Elelonena's desk until he uncovered the others, 8 in total, concealed within various drawers and compartments. A clandestine correspondence that had flourished for months beneath his very roof, betwixt his wife and his chattel. He devoured them all. Every word, every intimate confession, every expression of a feeling that ought not to exist could not be countenanced. Each represented a violation so fundamental it sundered the very foundations of the rigid order he had devoted his life to upholding. When he had concluded his reading, Charles Beaumont meticulously folded the letters, slipped them into his coat pocket, and departed his wife's chambers. He descended the grand staircase, traversing the expansive foyer with its lustrous marble floors and scintillating crystal chandelier, and stepped out onto the veranda, whence he could survey the cotton fields stretching into the hazy distance. He remained there for a protracted period, smoking a cigar deep in thought. Some men, consumed by immediate fury, would have acted precipitously. But Charles Beaumont was not as most men. He was a politician, a cunning strategist, one who comprehended that vengeance, served cold, was vengeance served with ruthless efficacy. He would not hasten, he would not yield to impulse. He would meticulously plan this, would orchestrate it with flawless precision, would ensure that when he finally moved against them both, the ensuing consequences would be absolute and immutable. For this was not merely an issue of a wife's infidelity or a slave's audacious presumption. This concerned order, concerned power, concerned the bedrock principle that some individuals held ownership over others, that some lives possessed inherent value while others did not, that the world was structured by a hierarchy that must be upheld at any cost, and Elelonena and Elijah, through the very nature of their feelings for one another, had dared to insinuate that perhaps that entrenched hierarchy was a deceit, that perhaps all souls were equally human, equally worthy, equally capable of love, of dignity, and of holding intrinsic meaning. That indeed was the true transgression, not carnal union. Of that there had been ample across the racial divides of the South, all of it violent, one-directional, and deemed perfectly acceptable so long as white men perpetrated it upon black women. But this mutual affection, this profound recognition of each other's inherent humanity, this insidious suggestion that a slave could be a soul worthy of a white woman's devotion, this threatened the entire edifice of Southern society, and Charles Beaumont would consign the world to ashes ere he permitted such a blasphemy to stand. He extinguished his cigar, meticulously crushing it beneath his boot, and re-entered the mansion to commence his grim planning. Elelonena sensed an ominous shift the instant she returned home that evening. There was a peculiar quality to the pervasive silence, charged with a perilous energy, akin to the pregnant atmosphere preceding a lightning strike. The servants moved through the house with uncharacteristic alacrity, their gazes averted, their countenances meticulously blank in a manner that signified a terrible knowledge they dared not voice. Danina found her in the upper hallway, her youthful countenance rigid with terror. "Ma'am," she whispered with urgent breathlessness, "the governor has been in your chambers, he—" She could not complete the utterance, but there was no need. Elelonena comprehended instantly. The letters, her very blood transmuted into ice. She had exercised such meticulous caution, had secreted them away with such thoroughness, or so she had deluded herself into believing. But clearly, not with sufficient care, not with ample thoroughness, not nearly enough to safeguard that which desperately required protection. "Where is he now?" Elelonena inquired, her voice astonishingly steady. "His study. He has been there for hours. Will not permit anyone entry." Elelonena proceeded to her chambers first, moving with swift urgency, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The drawer where she had safeguarded the letters lay agape, utterly empty. She inspected the other clandestine receptacles, though she already knew, with chilling certainty, what she would discover. Nothing. All were vanished. For a moment, breath utterly deserted her. The room seemed to lurch around her, reality fracturing into something surreal and nightmarish. This was the inexorable end. She knew it with an absolute, chilling certainty. The letters constituted irrefutable evidence, words penned in her own hand that chronicled every forbidden sentiment. But her initial thought was not for her own fate. Elijah. She had to forewarn him, had to somehow convey a message to him ere Charles executed his retribution, for she understood her husband well enough to know that his rage would not primarily be directed at her. White women could be granted absolution, could be rationalized away, could be portrayed as hapless victims of seduction or madness or inherent feminine frailty. But a black man who had dared to aspire beyond his station, who had dared to harbor affection for a white woman, who had dared to commit to paper words that insinuated he viewed himself as human and equal, for that there was no absolution, only death. She found Danina again. "You must warn him," Elelonena implored urgently, her hands gripping the girl's slender shoulders. "You must tell Elijah to flee tonight now before it is irrevocably too late." "Ma'am," Danina cried, tears coursing down her face, "Cole and 3 other men have already gone to apprehend him. The governor dispatched them an hour ago." Elelonena felt the very earth give way beneath her. "No, no, merciful God, no." She fled down the grand staircase, through the mansion's vast expanse, and out into the humid September evening, her gown tangling about her legs, her meticulously arranged hair coming unbound, all vestiges of propriety utterly abandoned. She hastened towards the slave quarters, towards the place where they would undoubtedly have taken Elijah, towards whatever horror was poised to unfurl. She could discern them ere she reached the quarters, a menacing cluster of men near the overseer's house, torchlight savagely cleaving through the encroaching darkness, the very forms of violence rendered starkly in shadow and flame. Cole stood at the epicenter, and beside him, his hands bound behind his back, his countenance already marred with blood, stood Elijah. "Cease!" Elelenina shrieked, her voice raw with desperation. "Cease this atrocity now!" The men turned, their gazes fixed upon her, their faces registering surprise and a flicker of something akin to embarrassment. A white woman coursing through the slave quarters, her hair unbound and wild, her gown rent from her frantic sprint across the grounds. It was unseemly, utterly shocking, a profound violation of every code of conduct that governed Southern femininity. Cole's expression transmuted into something cruelly satisfied. "Mrs. Beaumont, you ought to return to the house. This is not a matter for a lady to witness. I commanded you to cease." Elelenina reached the periphery of the men, her chest heaving, her eyes seeking and finding Elijah's ravaged face. He regarded her with an expression that utterly shattered her heart. Not surprise, not anger, but a profound, melancholic inevitability, as if he had always known this would be his terminus, and was almost relieved to have it concluded. "Elelenina, retreat," he urged quietly. "Do not exacerbate this situation." "Worse?" She emitted a sound that was half laughter, half sob, a fractured utterance. "How could this conceivably be worse? That is sufficient." Charles Beaumont's voice cleaved through the surrounding chaos like a honed blade. He had materialized from the direction of the main house, walking with a slow, deliberate cadence, his countenance a rigid mask of frigid fury. "Elelenina, return to the house forthwith." "No." The single word detonated in the air, echoing like an explosion. Wives did not refuse their husbands in this world, in this epoch, in this place. Women did not openly defy men, particularly not in public, and most especially not before enslaved souls who might, God forbid, conceive notions of possible resistance. Charles advanced, his voice plummeting to a dangerous, resonant whisper. "You will return to the house, or I shall have you conveyed there. Do not, I warn you, test my resolve in this matter." "Then have me carried," Elelenina declared, and though she trembled, her voice remained unwavering. "For I am not forsaking him." For a fleeting instant, something flickered across Charles's countenance. Shock, perhaps, or a chilling recognition that his wife had transmuted into a stranger, a being capable of defiance he had never conceived possible. "Do you grasp the enormity of what you have done?" Charles demanded, his voice taut with suppressed fury. "Do you comprehend the scandal, the profound humiliation, the utter demolition of everything I have painstakingly constructed? I comprehend that I have succumbed to love for a man who possesses more decency and honesty than you ever shall," Elelenina declared. And once the words were irrevocably uttered, she felt a peculiar lightness, as if confession itself were a liberation. "I comprehend that I have endured 15 years of my existence as your mere decoration, your ostentatious proof of civilization, your decorative chattel. And for the first time I comprehended that I had felt truly human, not merely an adornment upon your shelf." Charles's hand moved with such swiftness that she scarcely perceived its approach. The blow flung her sideways, igniting a galaxy of stars across her vision, the sudden, brilliant taste of blood blooming in her mouth. She heard Elijah utter a sound of primal fury and witnessed him surge forward before 3 men seized him, restraining him with hands both brutal and efficient. "Do not dare touch her!" Elijah cried, wrestling against his captors. For a fleeting instant, the veneer of careful submission dissolved entirely, revealing the man beneath, the one compelled to conceal his intellect, his strength, his profound capacity for love and rage and every human essence that slavery sought to excise. "You see," Charles addressed the assembled men, his voice carrying an awful satisfaction, "you perceive the presumption, the sheer audacity. This animal believes he possesses the right to defend a white woman. He believes he has the right to feel anything beyond gratitude for his station. This is the consequence when they are permitted to forget their proper place. He has committed no wrong." Eleanor declared, pushing herself upright, heedless of the pain radiating through her skull. We exchanged letters. We conversed. She halted, suddenly understanding that any explanation offered would only exacerbate their predicament. There existed no defense that would save Elijah, no argument capable of penetrating the fortress of rage and wounded pride her husband had erected. You wrote letters, Charles reiterated, drawing the folded papers from his pocket. Indeed, I have perused them, every word, love letters penned between my wife and my property, between a woman of the highest social standing and a field slave who cannot even legally be taught to read or write. He turned to Elijah, his countenance frigid. Though apparently you instructed yourself, did you not? Another transgression, another presumption, another testament to why stringent discipline is imperative. If you harm him, Elena's voice trembled, I shall never forgive you. I shall abandon you. I shall ensure every influential person from here to New Orleans knows precisely the sort of man you are. Charles laughed, the sound genuinely amused. Abandon me with what resources? What fortune? What protection? You are my wife, Elena. Legally, you are my possession, almost as much as he is. You may issue threats at your leisure, but we both understand you wield no power here. You have never possessed power. You have only possessed my permission to feign its existence. The truth of his words struck her like another physical blow. He spoke rightly. In the eyes of the law, within the very fabric of society, she held no independent being. She was Mrs. Charles Beaumont, an extension of her husband, a chattel of her father before him. She could not own property, could not enter into contracts, could not even dissolve her marriage without her husband's sanction. She possessed no legal standing, no financial wherewithal, no authority beyond what men chose to bestow upon her. She had always apprehended this abstractly, but confronting it now, realizing the totality of her entrapment, understanding that all her privilege amounted to nothing when juxtaposed with actual autonomy, was devastating. Thus, here is what shall transpire, Charles continued, his voice assuming the gravitas of a judge pronouncing sentence. You, Elena, shall be dispatched to your sister's abode in Charleston. You will remain there for 6 months, allowing the scandal to subside. We shall inform society you suffered a nervous collapse requiring rest and medical attention. People will gossip, but they will believe it, for what other explanation could account for such madness? Upon your return, you shall embody the model wife, obedient, silent, suitably grateful for my mercy in not divorcing you and thus annihilating what meager reputation you have left. He turned to Elijah. As for you, you have committed manifold transgressions, teaching yourself to read and write, corresponding with your master's wife, aspiring to be that which you can never be. The penalty for such presumption is typically death, but I envision something more fitting. Elena felt her stomach plummet. Death would have been terrible, but at least swift. The way Charles uttered more fitting suggested a torment far worse. I am selling you, Charles stated, observing Elijah's countenance for a reaction. Tomorrow morning, to a cotton plantation in Mississippi, the Hicks operation. I trust you have heard of it. Even in the torchlight, Elena could discern Elijah's face blanching. Everyone had heard of the Hicks plantation. It was a death sentence cloaked as a sale. The average life expectancy for an enslaved person there was 3 years. The labor was so brutal, the conditions so appalling, that it was considered a punishment exceeding execution. You cannot, Elena whispered. Charles, please, I implore you. I can, and I shall, he rejoined. He will be worked to death in that hellhole, but slowly, agonizingly, with years to contemplate his presumption and the ramifications of forgetting his station. And you, my dear wife, will spend the remainder of your life knowing that your selfishness, your inability to govern your base emotions directly precipitated his destruction. No! Elena lunged toward Charles, but Cole seized her, his hands rough on her arms. You are a monster, a complete monster. He is innocent. We have done nothing but exchange letters, but feel emotions we cannot help but feel. Innocence and guilt are not measured by your sentiments, Charles said coldly. They are measured by the order of things, by the laws of God and man that delineate the civilized from the savage, the master from the slave. You have violated that order. Both of you have. An order must be re-established no matter the cost. He gestured to Cole. Take him to the holding cell. Ensure he is prepared for transport at dawn. As for Mrs. Beaumont, He looked at Elelonena with something that might have been pity had it been alloyed with any warmth. "Take her to her chambers and secure the door. Post guards. She is to converse with no one until her carriage departs for Charleston tomorrow afternoon." "I despise you," Elelonena said, her words flat and absolute. "For the rest of my life, however many years remain to me, I shall hate you with every breath I draw." "I can endure that," Charles replied, "so long as you do so quietly and without further scandal." They dragged Elijah away, and he offered no resistance. What would have been the purpose? Fighting would only have afforded them a pretext to beat him worse, to inflict further punishment upon the hell he was already condemned to endure. As they pulled him past Elelonena, their eyes met for one final moment. "I am sorry," she mouthed, tears coursing down her face. He shook his head slightly, as if to convey there was nothing for which to apologize. As if he would undertake it all again. As if the brief span of being seen and valued was worth any price they would compel him to pay. Then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness, and Elelonena was being pulled back toward the mansion, her sobs echoing through the humid night air. In her chambers, locked in and guarded, Elelonena collapsed to the floor and wept until her well of tears ran dry. She had destroyed him. Her feelings, her selfishness, her inability to accept the confines of her life. She had condemned him to death, not a swift demise, but the slow, grinding horror of working himself to oblivion in the Mississippi heat. She had loved him, and love had become destruction. Around midnight she discerned sounds from outside, movement, shouting, the clamor of some unfolding event. She rushed to her window and beheld flames. The slave quarters were ablaze. Not the main structures, but smaller buildings, storage sheds, the holding cell where they would have confined Elijah. Flames ascended into the night sky, painting everything in hues of orange and red and terror. Elelonena watched, her hands pressed against the glass, and understood that someone had chosen freedom through fire over a slow death in Mississippi. Whether it was Elijah himself or other enslaved individuals who had chosen to aid him, she would never know. But she prayed with an intensity that astonished her, given how little faith she had harbored in God for years, that he had escaped, that he was running through the darkness towards something better, that perhaps somehow he would survive. The fire was contained within an hour. The main house was never imperiled, but in the ensuing chaos, smoke and confusion, one truth emerged. Elijah was gone. They discovered the holding cell empty, its lock broken from the outside. No trace of him anywhere on the grounds. Hounds were dispatched to track him, but the rain that commenced shortly after midnight washed away his scent. Patrols were organized, rewards posted, notices dispatched to neighboring plantations and towns. But Elijah had vanished into the night like smoke, like a wraith, like something that had never existed at all. Charles was incensed, but there was nothing to be done. An escaped slave represented a financial loss, yet not an unprecedented one. It happened. The punishment would be terrible if Elijah were caught. But Charles now grappled with greater concerns. Managing the scandal, safeguarding his political career, ensuring that his wife's disgrace did not dismantle all he had painstakingly constructed. Elelonena was sent to Charleston the following day as planned. She departed quietly, numbly, feeling as if all life had been leached from her. The letters were incinerated, the evidence eliminated, the narrative reshaped into something more palatable. A wife who had suffered a nervous breakdown, a slave who had taken advantage and then fled when discovered, a husband demonstrating mercy and discretion by handling the matter privately. Society embraced the explanation because it desired to, because the alternative, that a white woman and a black man had genuinely cared for one another, had seen each other as equals, had dared to love across the chasm of race and power, was far too menacing to acknowledge. But Elelonena knew the truth. And in Charleston, seated in her sister's drawing room, surrounded by those who regarded her with pity and condescension, she made a resolution. She would endure this, would navigate the 6 months of exile, would return to Louisiana and fulfill the role expected of her. But she would never, ever forgive. And she would never cease searching for signs that Elijah had survived, that he had reached the north, that somewhere in this vast country he was alive and free, and remembered her. It was a fragile hope, but it was all she possessed. And in the Mississippi swamps, moving by night, guided by the North Star, drinking from streams and subsisting on what he could pilfer or catch, Elijah pressed onward. His body was weakened by the beating Cole had inflicted before the fire. His hands were raw from forcing open the lock on the holding cell, a lock weakened by someone he never learned who had chosen to assist him, even at grave risk to themselves. But he was alive, and he was free. And every night before he found slumber in whatever refuge he had discovered, he thought of Elelonena, of her face, her voice, her letters, the brief, impossible bond they had shared. Some loves, he mused, are worth dying for, but this one, perhaps, was worth living for. So he continued his journey northward toward a freedom he had never known, carrying her memory like a guiding light in the darkness. 6 months blossomed into a year, then 2. Elelonena returned from Charleston in the spring of 1848, thinner than when she departed, quieter, her beauty shadowed by something that resembled grief yet moved with the force of rage. She performed her role with mechanical precision, the penitent wife, the recovered invalid, the woman who had learned her lesson and now understood her place. Charles accepted her back, for divorce would have courted greater scandal than reconciliation. They resumed their separate lives beneath the same roof, rarely speaking, meeting only when social obligation mandated the pretense of marriage. At night, Elelonena lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling like a ghost haunting her own existence. There was no news of Elijah. He had not been captured, which implied either he had reached the north or had perished somewhere along the way, his body never discovered. Elelonena chose to believe the former. She had to believe it, for the alternative was unbearable. The Beaumont estate continued its accustomed rhythm. Cotton was planted and harvested. Enslaved people toiled and suffered and died and were replaced. Charles's political career advanced. The world turned according to its cruel logic, and nothing changed save that Elelonena now understood precisely how deeply she despised that world and all it represented. She commenced undertaking small acts, quiet rebellions that no one would notice or care about. She secretly instructed several of the house servants to read, concealing books in her chambers, conducting lessons behind locked doors. She arranged for additional food to be sent to the quarters, for medicine when illness struck, for small kindnesses that could not redress the massive injustice but might alleviate individual suffering. Dinina became her confederate in these endeavors. The girl who had carried the letters had matured into a woman of 20, sharper and more circumspect than ever, yet still willing to risk herself for tiny moments of defiance against the system that owned her. "Do you believe he reached the north?" Dinina inquired one day in late 1849, as they sorted through Elelonena's wardrobe, ostensibly organizing but truly seeking private time for conversation. "I must believe he did," Elelonena replied. "I must believe all of it meant something." "Perhaps it did," Dinina responded quietly. "Perhaps merely the striving was the something. Perhaps simply feeling human for a moment was worth it, even if it ended poorly." Elelonena gazed at the young woman, still so youthful, still ensnared, yet still discovering ways to survive with dignity and intelligence and a fierce refusal to be broken. "You possess wisdom beyond your years, Dinina." "It is not about wisdom, madam," Dinina countered. "It is about what one must tell oneself to endure the day." The years continued their relentless march, 1850, 1851. The country was tearing itself asunder over slavery, though people pretended otherwise. The Compromise of 1850 merely concealed the divisions without resolving them. Tension crackled throughout the South. As more enslaved people fled northward, as white abolitionists grew more vocal, as the economic system built on human bondage began to reveal its fissures, Charles grew increasingly paranoid about slave rebellions, about the influence of Northern ideals, about maintaining control through ever harsher discipline. The overseer, Cole, was granted free rein to terrorize the workforce. Punishments grew more brutal. The quarters became a realm of ceaseless dread. Elelonena observed it all with horror and helplessness. She possessed no power to alter anything. Her small acts of kindness were mere drops in an ocean of cruelty. She was complicit by her very existence in this house, on this plantation, in this system that ground human beings into nothingness for profit. The guilt consumed her, but so too did the anger. And beneath both, a question perpetually surfaced. What would Elijah wish her to do? If he were alive, if he had attained freedom, if he thought of her at all, what would he desire her legacy to be? In the winter of 1852, Elelonena made a profound decision. She began meticulously documenting everything, inscribing the names of enslaved people on the plantation, their narratives, their families, the injustices they suffered. She recorded Cole's atrocities in painstaking detail. She noted Charles's business dealings, his political corruption, the methods by which he maintained power through violence and fear. She knew not what she would do with this information, but she gathered it, organized it, hid it carefully in places no one would conceive of searching. It was perilous work. If Charles discovered it, if anyone discovered it, she would be punished, possibly institutionalized, certainly removed from the estate and any capacity to aid anyone. But she undertook it regardless, for it was the sole form of resistance available to her, the only way to honor what she and Elijah had shared, the only path toward imbuing her life with meaning beyond decorative suffering. Mama Seraphine discerned the transformation in Elelonena. The old woman was in her 60s now, her body bowed by decades of labor, but her eyes remained keen, perceiving all. "You walk a perilous path, Miss Elelonena," she remarked one day, encountering Elelonena alone in the kitchen garden. "I know. Do you truly believe you will rescue people with your writings? Do you truly believe words on paper will alter what this is?" "I believe," Elelonena said slowly, "that someone must bear witness. Someone must declare that this occurred. These people existed, these crimes were committed. Even if no one ever reads it, even if it changes nothing, someone must record it." Seraphine studied her for a long moment, then she nodded. "My grandchild, the one they sold last year, her name was Ruth. She was 12 years old. She sang like an angel. I desire you to commit that to writing. I desire you to ensure someone remembers she existed, that she possessed a name, that she mattered." "I will," Elelonena promised. "I shall write about Ruth and about everyone else. I shall ensure they are remembered." It became a sacred mission. Enslaved people began approaching Elelonena with their narratives, entrusting her with their histories, their losses, the names of children stolen, spouses sold, parents slain. She meticulously transcribed it all, creating a record of testimony that served as both memorial and indictment. She knew it was dangerous for them as much as for her. Association with her could invite suspicion, could brand them as potential rebels or troublemakers, but they came nonetheless, driven by the profound human need to be remembered, to have their existence acknowledged, to matter to someone. Then, in the spring of 1853, an event transpired that altered everything. A letter arrived, not through conventional channels, not officially addressed to Elelonena, but discreetly slipped to Denina by a traveling peddler who traversed the plantation selling wares. The peddler was a free black man from Pennsylvania, part of a clandestine network that conveyed information and occasionally individuals along secret routes. Denina brought the letter to Elelonena, her hands trembling. Elelonena opened it with shaking fingers, her heart hammering so violently she could scarcely breathe. The handwriting differed, more assured, more practiced than it had been 5 years prior, but she recognized it instantly. "Elelonena, I am alive. I reached the north. It demanded 2 years of concealment and flight and narrowly escaping death more times than I can recount. But I am in Canada now. I am free. I ought not to write to you. I comprehend the peril. But I had to let you know I survived, that what we shared was not simply annihilated, that something good arose from all that pain. I learned to read more proficiently here. I learned to write correctly. I secured employment as a carpenter. I acquired a small room that is mine, which no one can seize. I awaken each morning and recall that I am no longer property, and sometimes I can scarcely believe it is real, but it is real. I am real. I am alive. To know that the choice we made, the risk to know that the choice we made, the risk we undertook was not in vain. You bestowed upon me something to live for when I had forgotten how to desire life. You made me remember I was human, and now I am free. And being free, being whole, being able to choose my own path, that is partly because of you, because you saw me when no one else did, because you made me believe I was worthy of something. I know not if you will ever receive this letter. I know not if attempting to reach you will only invite further tribulation. But I had to try. Thank you, Elelonena, for seeing me, for valuing me, for loving me when the world declared it impossible. Thank you for everything. Yours always, Elijah. Elelonena read the letter thrice, tears streaming down her face, her entire body shaking with emotion she could scarcely name, relief, joy, grief for all the lost time, rage at a world that had forced them apart, and something else. Something that felt like purpose, crystallizing into action. She found Danina. "I need you to help me do something insane. Madam, I need to leave. I need to go north. I need to—" Elelonena stopped, suddenly aware of how it sounded, a white woman abandoning her life, her marriage, her entire world to pursue a man she had not seen in 5 years, a relationship that had existed primarily in letters and stolen moments. But Danina did not appear shocked. She looked resigned, almost relieved. "I have been wondering when you would reach this decision," the young woman said. "I have been observing you grow thinner and sadder and angrier each year. I surmised eventually you would have to choose between perishing here or living elsewhere." "I cannot simply depart," Elelonena said, though even as she spoke the words, she was endeavoring to conceive how she could do precisely that. "I possess no money of my own, no means to travel." "No, you possess jewelry," Danina interjected. "You possess items you could sell. And you possess me, and I possess connections to individuals who assist folks in running north. Not merely slaves, madam, sometimes white women attempting to escape oppressive marriages, people in distress, people who need to vanish." Elelonena gazed at her. "You are part of the Underground Railroad." "Not officially, but I know people who know people, and if you are serious about this, if you are truly ready to surrender everything you possess here, even though it is not much, then I can connect you." "What of you?" Elelonena inquired. "If I depart, if Charles discovers you aided me, he will kill you." "Yes, probably." Danina's voice was matter-of-fact. "But I am 24 years old, and I am weary, Miss Elelonena. I am weary of being afraid, weary of watching those I love sold or beaten or worked to death, weary of merely surviving instead of living. So perhaps this is my chance too. Perhaps I run north concurrently with you. Perhaps we both attain freedom." Elelonena felt something akin to hope stirring in her chest for the first time in years. "You would do that? Risk everything?" "I have already been risking everything simply by being born black in Louisiana," Danina replied. "At least this way, I am risking it for something that might actually transform my life, instead of simply trying to endure another day." They began planning in secret. It would require months of preparation, to gather resources, to forge connections with the network that could facilitate their journey north, to fabricate a cover story that would buy them time before Charles realized Elelonena's absence. Elelonena sold jewelry piece by piece, claiming she was having items repaired or reset. She collected garments suitable for travel rather than society. She continued her documentation project, preparing to carry the records with her as evidence of the atrocities unfolding on plantations across the South. And she wrote back to Elijah, a letter Danina dispatched through the same network that had delivered his. "Elijah, I am coming. I know not when. I know not precisely how. But I am coming north. I refuse to spend the rest of my life as a ghost in this house, wed to a man I despise, complicit in a system that annihilates everything beautiful and human. You imparted to me the courage to remember I possess choices, even when the world asserts I do not. You revealed to me what it means to be brave, to risk everything for the possibility of becoming whole. Wait for me. However long it takes, wait for me. I love you. I have always loved you, and I am done feigning otherwise. Elelonena." The letter was dispatched in August 1853. Elelonena began finalizing her escape plans, but in September, disaster struck. Charles discovered her documentation project, not by accident. He had been having her observed, had grown suspicious of her conduct, her clandestine meetings with Danina, her peculiar inquiries about travel and northern routes. He discovered the records hidden in her chambers, pages upon pages of testimony, names, dates, descriptions of punishments and sales and atrocities. Evidence that could shatter his reputation, his political career, his entire existence if it ever became public. His rage was icy cold and methodical. He did not confront Elelonena immediately. Instead, he planned just as he had planned 5 years earlier when he discovered the letters. But this time, he would not be content with exile or separation. This time, he would ensure that Elelonena could never again threaten him, that her narratives, her testimony, her dangerous notions of equality and justice would perish with her. On the night of October 15, 1853, Charles Beaumont set his plan into motion, and the world erupted in flames. The fire began just after midnight in the east wing of the mansion, in a storage room filled with antique furniture and draperies, materials that would burn fiercely and swiftly. By the time the house servants comprehended what was transpiring, the flames had already ascended the walls and commenced racing through the corridors like a living entity ravenous for destruction. Elelonena awoke to smoke and shouting. For a moment, disoriented from sleep, she could not grasp what was happening. Then she smelled it. Acrid, choking, the unmistakable scent of fire consuming wood and fabric and everything in its path. She stumbled from her bed, reaching for a robe, her mind racing through calculations of escape routes and what she might seize before fleeing. But when she attempted her chamber door, she found it secured from the outside. Terror flooded through her. She pounded on the door, screaming for succor, but the roar of the fire drowned out her voice. Smoke began to seep beneath the door, tendrils of gray promising suffocation before the flames ever reached her. Charles had locked her in. The understanding struck her like a physical blow. This was no accident. This was murder, meticulously orchestrated to appear as tragedy. A terrible fire claiming the governor's unstable wife, the poor woman who had never recovered from her nervous breakdown, who had grown increasingly erratic and difficult. Such a shame. Such a loss. But these things happen. Elelonena ceased pounding and compelled herself to think. The door was solid, reinforced. She could not breach it. But there was a window. She ran to it, flung back the curtains, attempted to open it, and discovered it, too, had been fastened shut. Likely earlier that day, when she had been absent from her chambers. Every exit blocked, every escape route sealed. Charles had planned this perfectly. But Elelonena Beaumont had not survived the preceding 6 years by accepting defeat gracefully. She seized a heavy candlestick and began smashing the window. Glass shattered, falling in glittering shards to the ground 2 stories below. Not a survivable leap, but preferable to burning alive. She was halfway through clearing the remaining glass from the frame when she heard the door to her chamber crash open. She spun around, expecting Charles or perhaps Cole coming to ensure the task was completed. Instead, she saw Danina, her face streaked with soot, her eyes wild with fear and determination. Behind her stood Mama Seraphine and 2 other enslaved women from the house. "Come on!" Danina shouted. "No time! How did you break the lock? Move before this entire place collapses!" They ran through corridors rapidly filling with smoke. Flames had entirely consumed the east wing and were advancing upon the central sections of the house. The heat was overwhelming, oppressive, rendering it difficult to breathe or see clearly. Elelonena could hear the groan of timber beginning to yield, the crack of beams failing under stress. They descended the main staircase just as the chandelier plummeted, thousands of pieces of crystal exploding across the marble floor like a deadly hailstorm. Out through the front door onto the lawn, joining the pandemonium of servants and enslaved people attempting to combat the fire or salvage what possessions they could. But Elelonena saw Charles nowhere. "Where is the governor?" she cried, shouting to be heard over the roar of flames. "Do not know. Have not seen him since the fire commenced." Elelonena scanned the throng of people, the organized chaos of water brigades and rescue attempts. No Charles, nor Cole either, she realized. The 2 men who should have been directing the response were nowhere to be found, unless they had never intended to be found. "He is inside," Elelonena said with sudden certainty. "Charles is still inside. He ignited the fire, but something went awry. He became trapped." "Good," Danina said flatly. "Let him burn." Elelonena looked at the young woman, saw the absolute absence of mercy in her face, and understood that Dinah had earned the right to that coldness. They all had. Every person who had suffered under Charles Beaumont's dominion, who had been worked and beaten and degraded and dehumanized, they had earned the right to watch him perish and feel nothing but relief. But Elelonena found she could not. 15 years of marriage to a monster did not engender love, but it did create something. History, familiarity, the complex tangle of emotions that arises from sharing a life, even when that life is poisonous. She despised Charles, loathed him, wished him to face justice for his crimes, but she could not stand there and watch him burn alive. "I must try to find him," she said. "Miss Elelonena, you cannot." But Elelonena was already running back toward the mansion, ignoring Danina's shouts, ignoring the heat and smoke and danger. She pulled her robe up over her mouth and nose and plunged back into the burning edifice. The interior was hell-rendered visible. Flames ascended the walls like demons climbing. Smoke reduced visibility to almost nothing. The heat was so intense that Elelonena felt her skin beginning to blister merely from proximity. She moved through rooms she had traversed thousands of times, now transformed into landscapes of nightmare. "Charles!" she screamed. "Charles, where are you?" She found him in his study, the very place where he had read her letters to Elijah 5 years ago, where he had plotted his vengeance, where he had conducted the business of running a plantation built on human misery. He lay on the floor, pinned beneath a fallen beam, his face ashen with pain. When he saw Elena, something akin to surprise crossed his expression. "You," he said, his voice barely audible. "You returned." "I am an idiot," Elena replied, moving toward him, assessing whether she could shift the beam. It was massive, crafted from solid oak. Impossible for one person to lift alone. "Why did you do this, Charles? Why attempt to kill me? I was going to leave regardless." "You would have been rid of me." "Evidence," he gasped. "Your records, your documentation. If you conveyed them north, if you shared them with abolitionists, everything I built would be destroyed. My career, my reputation, everything. So, you decided to murder me instead. You forced my hand. You have been forcing my hand since the day you regarded that slave as if he were human." Charles coughed, blood appearing at the corner of his mouth. "This is your fault, Elena, all of it. If you had merely remained in your place, been what a wife should be, then I would have been dead inside instead of literally dying in a fire," Elena interrupted. "And you know what, Charles? I prefer this. At least, this way I was able to live first. At least I was able to feel genuine emotions, desire genuine things, matter to someone." She seized the beam and strained to lift it. It did not budge even a fraction of an inch. "Go," Charles said. "The house is collapsing. You cannot save me." "I know," Elena kept trying nonetheless, straining against the impossible weight. "But I must try. Not for you, for myself, so I can live with myself." "Idealistic and foolish," Charles said, but his voice had softened slightly. "That was always your flaw." "No," Elena replied. "My flaw was marrying you when I was 17 and knew no better. Everything else, everything I did, everything I felt, everyone I loved, that was the solution, not the problem." She heard the house groan, felt the floor beginning to tilt. They had run out of time. The building would likely collapse within minutes. "Elena," Charles said, his voice now urgent, frightened. "Go, please. I do not—" He stopped, seemed to be contemplating something. "I do not wish you to die, not truly. I was angry. Another cough, more blood. "I am sorry for what I did to you, for what I did to him, for all of it. Live." It was the first time in their 15 years of marriage that he had offered an apology for anything. And it was too little, too late, meaningless in the face of so much cruelty and destruction. But Elena still found herself saying, "I know." Then Dinah and Seraphine were there, appearing through the smoke like angels or ghosts, grabbing Elena's arms and pulling her away from the beam, from Charles, from the study that was already being consumed by advancing flames. "No!" Elena fought against them. "We must extract him. He is dead regardless," Seraphine stated bluntly. "That beam crushed something inside. Even if we extract him, he will perish, but you will not perish with him." "Not today." They dragged her through the burning house, Elena still struggling, still trying to return, until they literally hurled her out the front door and onto the lawn. She landed hard, the impact expelling the air from her lungs. By the time she could breathe again, the center of the house had collapsed inward with a sound like the world ending. Charles Beaumont died in the ruins of the mansion he had erected on the backs of enslaved people. His body would never be recovered, consumed entirely by flames that burned fiercely enough to reduce bone to ash. Elena watched the house burn through the night, seated on the grass with Danina beside her, neither speaking. Around them, people moved in shock, attempting to process what had transpired, what they had lost or gained, what would come next. As dawn broke over the ruins, casting everything in shades of gray and gold, Elena realized that the records she had so meticulously compiled were gone, incinerated. Every name, every testimony, every piece of evidence destroyed in the fire that was meant to destroy her. But the people whose stories she had documented were still alive, still present, still capable of recounting their own narratives, if anyone would listen. "What happens now?" Danina asked quietly. Elena looked at the smoking remains of the Beaumont mansion, at the people gathered on the lawn, enslaved and free, black and white, all of them displaced by the night's chaos. "I do not know," she admitted. "Legally, the estate will probably pass to Charles's brother. The plantation will continue. You will all still be—" She could not complete the sentence. "Property," Denina finished for her. "Yes." "Nothing truly changed, did it? Except now the great house is gone, and you are a widow." Elelenena remained silent for a long moment. Then she said, "I am still going north as soon as I can arrange it, and I am taking anyone who wishes to accompany me." Denina turned to look at her. "Are you serious?" "Completely. Charles's brother will require weeks to arrive from Virginia. In that time, this place will be chaos. No clear authority, no organization, everyone striving to discern what comes next. That is our window. That is when we run. They will pursue us. Probably. But some of us might succeed, and that is preferable to none of us attempting it. Resources I possess, money, connections, resources I possess, money, connections, the fact that I am white and therefore invisible in ways you cannot be, to assist people in escaping. It is not enough. It is not even nearly enough. But it is something." Denina studied her face for a long time. Then she said, "Miss Elelenena, you are finally developing a backbone. It took you long enough." Elelenena laughed despite everything, a sound that was half sob, half genuine amusement. "Better late than never. We shall see about that." Over the next 3 weeks, Elelenena orchestrated the largest escape the parish of St. Helena had ever witnessed. Utilizing what remained of her jewelry and the chaos of the estate's transition, she arranged transportation for 17 enslaved people along underground railroad routes north. Some would reach Canada. Others would discover freedom in northern states. Some would be apprehended and returned and terribly punished. But they would all have tried, would all have chosen risk over certainty, hope over despair, the possibility of freedom over the guarantee of bondage. Elelenena and Denina departed together on a cold November morning, just as Charles's brother arrived to assume possession of what remained of the Beaumont fortune. They traveled through networks of safe houses and sympathetic conductors, sometimes concealed in wagons beneath false floors, sometimes walking through forests at night, always moving north toward the promise of something better. It required 4 months to reach Canada. Elelenena found Elijah in a small town outside Toronto, working as a carpenter, residing in a modest room that was his own, his face fuller than she remembered, his eyes carrying less grief and more something that looked almost like peace. When she appeared at his door in March of 1854, 6.5 years after he had escaped the Beaumont plantation, he stared at her as if she were a ghost. "Elijah," she said, "I told you I was coming." And then she was in his arms, both of them weeping, holding each other with the desperate intensity of people who had traversed hell to reach this moment. They were married 3 weeks later, scandalizing the small free black community that had taken Elijah in, establishing a household that defied every convention of the world they had escaped. Denina found employment as a seamstress, eventually married a formerly enslaved man from Kentucky, and spent the remainder of her life assisting new escapees in establishing themselves in freedom. Elelenena never returned to the South. She lived in Canada with Elijah for 34 years, bore 3 children who grew up free and educated and never knew chains. She wrote about her experiences, publishing accounts under a pseudonym that detailed the realities of slavery from the perspective of someone who had benefited from it and then chosen to abandon that benefit. She died in 1888 at age 73 in a house she and Elijah had built together, surrounded by children and grandchildren who carried the legacy of 2 people who had refused to accept the world's definitions of who they could be and what they could mean to each other. Elijah outlived her by 4 years. He spent those years completing a project they had initiated together, a memorial garden where they planted a magnolia tree for every person they knew who had died enslaved. Every story Elelenena had documented and lost in the fire. Every life that had mattered, despite the world asserting it did not. The memorial still stands today, maintained by their descendants, a place of remembrance for those who resisted, who ran, who dared to be free, who loved across boundaries designed to keep them separate. And in Louisiana, the ruins of the Beaumont mansion became a legend, a cautionary tale about pride and transgression, about the perils of violating the social order, about what transpires when people forget their place. But for those who knew the true story, who understood what Elelenena and Elijah had shared, what they had sacrificed, what they had chosen despite impossible odds, the ruins signified something different. They were not a warning. They were a monument to the truth that love is more powerful than law, that humanity is more fundamental than hierarchy, that some things are worth burning the whole world down to protect. The Beaumont dynasty ended in fire and scandal as Charles had always feared. But Elelonena and Elijah's story, their defiant, impossible, beautiful story, survived. And survival in a world designed to destroy them both was the greatest victory of all.